Welcome back. Today is a very special day because it's the official release day of Every Time He Dies. Yay! It's my book birthday, it's release day, it's publication day, it's whatever you want to call it day. Basically, my book is out there in the world and you can totally buy it like everywhere, online or through your local independent retailer. How was that for a sales pitch? Thank you so much to everyone who pre-ordered a copy of Every Time He Dies. I will be announcing the winners on my social media channels this week, so if you're not following me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, you should change that immediately. Shameless plug. To celebrate the release of Every Time He Dies, I was going to do a reading today from Chapter 2. If you haven't previously watched my reading of Chapter 1, you can do so up in the cards. I will leave a little link. Before I begin, I'll just let you know that Chapter 2 is from Detective Lawrence's perspective. Detective Lawrence examined the older victim first. The blonde woman was in her 40s and wearing a denim miniskirt she should have retired a decade ago. There was that word again, retired. Lawrence's 65th birthday was 3 months away, a fact confirmed by his drooping grey eyes and drawn basset hound face. Once a copper hit pension age, it was all over. You never had to set an alarm or don your blues for a beat shift again. Of course, it had been a long time since Lawrence had worn his blues on duty. He'd been clocking on for 40-odd years. That kind of time deserved respect. Last week, though, a constable in her 30s made a Hitchcock reference while poking him in the stomach. Lawrence didn't see the resemblance. He still had most of his hair. But the message beneath the comment brought an unexpected blow. He was a fat old man on the cusp of retirement. His ex-wife was dead, and his only daughter refused to speak to him. When he walked out of the station for that final time, no one would be waiting for him. The blonde was propped on a chair in the corner, while the second victim, a brunette, was dumped face down on the floor. The Sundowner Motel, or the Sun, as Valley Dwellers called it, had managed to hold on to its position on Edward Street, despite the suburb's improving reputation. When Lawrence moved here in the 80s, Fortitude Valley was the wallow in which the dregs of city society settled. Junkies, dealers, bikers, strippers, working girls. You could still find them, of course, but now the place was filling up with trendy cocktail bars and restaurants, high-end boutique stores and luxury car yards. You were less and less likely to get your teeth knocked in. Lawrence thought you could make an argument about progress, but the two Jane Does before him offered a strong counterpoint. Lawrence heard the crime scene photographer cough dryly, and he moved aside so the fella could get on with it. The crumpled Moroccan-inspired bedspread matched the dark saffron walls, dated even by the detective's humble standards. The bedside lamp furthest the door was on. The padded chair at the breakfast bar was pulled out, and there was space beside it for a second seat. The carpet was worn, flattened, and spotted with a decade's worth of suspicious stains. If anyone ever slept in this dump, Lawrence thought, they probably kept their jeans on. The photographer sniffed, unwrapped a butt of menthol, and moved towards the adjacent bathroom. The second victim momentarily forgotten. Lawrence crouched beside the woman sprawled on the floor, knees protesting as he leaned over his stomach. She was tall, small-framed, and had long dark hair. She could be in her early 20s, but gauging a young woman's age was tricky business. 14-year-olds could look 25, some 29-year-olds looked 19. Unlike the first victim, this lass was fully clothed. Leather jacket, jeans, boots. Boots. She wasn't staying here. Maybe she'd interrupted things, Lawrence thought. That's why he killed her. Lawrence didn't know for sure that it was a he, but experience and statistics made for a safe bet. There was a large blood stain beneath the victim's head, her throat sliced open. One victim choked, the second attacked with a knife. He ignored the cramping in his knees as he leaned forward to get a better look at her face. The mouth was wide, nose narrow, and eyes pale blue. Daphne. Lawrence shot up with such force that he lost his footing, half falling against the nearby cupboard. Daphne. You good, detective? The cameraman asked, emerging from the bathroom. Lawrence nodded, his throat too thick to talk. He turned and left the way he entered. Outside it was cold, and for that he was thankful. Hopefully it would knock some sense into the old noggin. It's not Daph, he thought, while sucking in another mouthful of air. The nose was too thin, the eyes too big. Really? The poor girl in there looked nothing like his daughter. He took another breath, slow and steady, and reassured himself again, it's not Daph. Lawrence gripped the loose barrier of the landing and leaned out over the near-empty car park, wishing for nothing more than a whinny red. You stubborn old goat, Ruth's voice echoed in his head. How long you gonna wait until you call her? Ruth had been gone for near on 4 years. Cancer. Now that was the real stubborn goat, he thought. Still, he could hear her nagging him now just as clearly as when she was alive. He squeezed the railing like he was making orange juice. It hurt how desperately he wished things were different. Days could bump together, filled with 100 easily forgotten regrets. The big ones, though, they stay with you. Ruth had confronted him after she'd received her diagnosis. She said she knew something had been going on and that she wasn't prepared to spend the remaining days of her life living a lie. So Lawrence told her everything. He knew the affair would cost him a wife, but he hadn't expected to lose a daughter. A red Toyota Corolla pulled into the car park. Lawrence released his grip. At least McPhee had gotten his voicemail, but the blighter didn't have to come in his own car. He could have stopped off at the station first. He completed his certificate a month back, gaining the new title of Detective Senior Constable McPhee. Lawrence still thought it strange to see him in plain clothes instead of blues. It should have been Tom. A flicker of rage rose from his gut before he could snuff it out. Tom had passed his certification, but never collected his gold badge. Lawrence shook his head, forcing out all thoughts of his estranged daughter and her deceased partner. He gripped the railing and watched as McPhee crossed the asphalt, his red handlebar mustache making him stand out like a bikie at a CWA meeting. The Vlad laws had been in effect for 18 months. Considering the state's recent crackdown on illegal motorcycle gangs, Lawrence thought the moustache was more odd than ironic. The two had been partners for the past 6 months. Retirement never looked so good. Now that he was outside, Lawrence noticed a lingering smoky scent. Junkies loved to mask their drug use with incense. Lawrence couldn't walk past a New Age shop without that musky smell conjuring up some memory of a former bust. Between the smoke and the motel's seedy reputation, Lawrence made a mental note to follow up with the forensic physician, make sure that the blood samples were checked for drugs. Meth was big right now. McPhee mounted the steps, leading to the 2nd-story landing. "Mornin', detective." Lawrence nodded in reply. They were lucky to have arrived first. Emergency services had already left, and it wasn't often that they beat the forensic crew. The crime scene unit usually had first dibs, but Lawrence was in no mood for waiting around until Sergeant Peter Murphy and his team showed up. "Let's get this over with." The detective stepped back towards room 8, his partner following him. "Jesus, that's a bit brutal." McPhee's hooded eyes ran over the brunette on the floor before drifting up towards the blonde. Snapping on his gloves, he crouched by the body on the floor, careful to keep his shoes out of the tacky pool of blood. From this angle, the victim's face was concealed beneath a splay of dark tendrils. Lawrence's breath hitched. How easily that girl could have been Daph. A few moments ago, he thought it was. "She's young," McPhee murmured. "I'd say early 20s. Being in his late 20s, McPhee was in a much better position than Lawrence to perform such crackpot analysis. She's got some bruises on her neck. Must have been strangled before. Lawrence slipped on his gloves and pulled back the duvet. Though the sheets were rumpled, they were clean, at least to the naked eye. He peered over his shoulder towards the half-dressed blonde. Hopefully the guy hadn't used a rubber and there'd still be a few seminal stains on the sheets. He quickly scanned the room again, but could see no evidence of incense having been burned. If they'd taken the time to clean that up, it was unlikely they'd left the murder weapon behind. McPhee stood up and edged towards the older victim to get a better look. Maybe it's a mother-daughter tag team type deal. Maybe, Lawrence murmured as he slid open the bedside table drawer, but there was nothing in there except a copy of the good news. Weird, isn't it? McPhee peered at the purple bruising around the woman's neck. If the guy had a knife, why did he strangle this one? Lawrence glanced at the body in the corner. He'd read enough pathologist reports to know what this one would say. Thyroid gland hemorrhaged, hyoid bone fractured, small abrasions on both sides of the throat. Death by asphyxiation. Maybe it was personal. Either he knew her or she reminded him of someone. If he was high, then there may not be any logical reason. McPhee stepped over to the cupboard and pulled it open. No luggage or personal effects. I'm pretty sure the blonde didn't show up wearing a bra and a skirt. He probably took the shirt with him. Nothing else was left behind. We'll find out from reception who booked the room if it was under her name or his. He didn't bother adding that at the Sun. Most guests booked under fake names and paid in cash. I'm guessing the brunette walked in. McPhee's eyes traced over her. Maybe our guy was finishing up with the blonde and this one came in too early. If our guy was using meth or on speed, he'd be able to go for hours. We can't rule out that the women weren't staying here, not yet. Forensics will run the bloods, check for signs of sexual assault. Dr. Cardwell might even lift some DNA skin cell samples off her. Lawrence indicated the blonde with the swollen throat. You might want to check this out, Detective. The photographer emerged from the bathroom, sticking his thumb over his shoulder behind him. Lawrence gingerly stepped around the body on the floor and entered the bathroom. His eyes went straight to the bath, half expecting a third victim, but the shower curtain was pulled back and the tub was empty. No towel hung on the rack, and he hadn't seen one in the room either. If the murderer had been high, he still had enough sense to minimize the chances of trace evidence. Maybe he'd done this before. When Lawrence turned towards the vanity, he hardly registered the bare counter and untouched toiletries. The room froze. He stopped breathing. His stomach dropped. Fuck. He thought the club had wised up, that this kind of shit was over. Lawrence took an unsteady step forward. They'd left their symbol on the mirror, a circle drawn in blood and slashed by a diagonal line. The crude design was no bigger than his hand, and though the blood was smeared thinly, the symbol was still clearly identifiable. Given the towel factor, Lawrence knew it would be a match to one of the victims. Isn't that? McPhee squeezed into the tiny bathroom behind his superior. Lawrence nodded. Yep, Road Dogs Club logo. You interrogated the maids yet? Questioned, not interrogated, and no, I haven't. McPhee leaned forward to get a better look. You reckon Murphy can get a fingerprint out of that? Maybe. The dragon could have ruined the print, though. Still, there's a chance some DNA's been left behind. Lawrence stepped around McPhee and headed back out onto the landing. Where are you going? I don't want to be here when forensics arrives. Murphy will chew my ass out. Lawrence headed down the external staircase. The sun was out now, lighting the bitumen of the car park, and Lawrence was glad. With only a few more months of active duty left, he tried to forget about the road dogs, to let it go. But here, on the sunny Queensland winter day, he'd been given another shot. as I mentioned before, Every Time He Dies is now available for purchase everywhere online. You can find links at my website, taraeast.com. While you're there, be sure to read the first 3 chapters for free and to sign up for my email newsletter. When you do, you'll get a free downloadable cheat sheet, 7 ways to stay motivated as a writer. Be sure to follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you so much for watching again, guys, and I'll see you next week.